Okay, we're getting into this story about Donald Trump. So a couple of days ago, we talked about the fact that Colorado decided to remove Donald Trump from the ballot for the 2024 presidential election. Well, in a shocking turn of events, Colorado has decided to change their mind. Believe it or not, they have decided to put Donald Trump back on the ballot. However, as they have decided to do that, it appears that Maine, my neighbor to the north, has decided to remove Donald Trump from their ballot. Let's get into the Colorado change of heart.
Here, Jonathan Turley is a constitutional law attorney and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. We've got some more news on this today, the Colorado case in particular. The Colorado Republican Party has challenged its appeal to the Supreme Court. What do we expect from here? How fast could the Supreme Court take this up? Does the Supreme Court take this up?
Well, it's a very good question because there is an exit ramp that not only Colorado might prefer, but the court itself might prefer. Colorado's Secretary of State agreed that Trump will stay on the ballot if the Supreme Court does not rule before the January 5th certification date for the state. And so what the position of the state is that unless the court agrees with the Supreme Court of Colorado, which is extremely unlikely, or declines any review, which is also unlikely, that Trump will remain on the ballot because there won't be any action. But what happens after that then becomes rather interesting because Colorado could move and say, look, well, this is now moot because there's no change on the ballot. People are going to be allowed to vote that way. And they could then avoid review by the Supreme Court. I think most of us believe that the Supreme Court is going to reverse the Colorado Supreme Court. So they may actually prefer to moot this out by having the court run out the clock. It's a very short period of time that the Supreme Court has to deal with this.
And one thing to keep in mind as well is that, remember, it's a conservative Supreme Court. So they're more likely, I would assume they're more likely to vote in favor of keeping Donald Trump on the ballot in Colorado, right? Remember, the GOP actually said, fine, you want to remove him from the ballot, then we'll just go ahead and run as a caucus, and that'll actually help Donald Trump.
If the Supreme Court, if they're looking at it, and sure they are, they have to now, there's a petition, at least whether they're going to take it up or not. And you've got Colorado, and then you've got Michigan, and on all the states on the other side. And now you have these other challenges coming up in other states. Does the Supreme Court look at this and say, guys, we've got to weigh in here?
I think they should. That there's no question in my mind that they've got to render a decision here. Many of us view this theory as not just unfounded, but dangerous.
Pause. I just want to get a good look at this map. So the yellow states are states with suits to bar Trump from the ballot. The green states are states that are pending appeals. So we have Oregon, Nevada, Wyoming, New Mexico, Alaska, Texas, South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Wisconsin, New Jersey, Vermont, and New York. Those are states with suits to bar Trump from the ballot. And I wanted you to see this because I want you to realize it's not just about Colorado. It's not just about Maine. There are other states that are actively looking to pursue this as well. So I do think it's going to get to the point where this is going to have to be ruled on a national level, where the Supreme Court may have to step in here. And this is dangerous in a sense that whether you like Donald Trump or not, and I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but the thing is, this can happen to anyone. Also, I'm going to ask you this now. We're going to talk about this towards the end of this story. Donald Trump has not been found guilty of an insurrection. That's why I have that poll there for you in the live chat. He is not, as of right now, he has not been found guilty. Let's continue.
And it's going to create instability in a system that has been historically the most stable democracy in history. And this is all happening on this reduced schedule. We are waiting for decisions in places like Maine, which could very well follow Colorado. So the Supreme Court needs to, in my view, put this theory to rest with finality and hopefully with unanimity. But we will see. You know, the Supreme Court often takes exit ramps when they're available. And if they don't rule before the 5th, this may be mooted out. But I'm hoping it will not be. I think there's arguments to be made that this will still not be moot.
Of all the issues that may come up before the Supreme Court as they relate to former President Trump, there's his immunity claim, there's the law pertaining January 6 prosecutions. Which has the most gravity to the constitutional system, do you think?
I think this one does. With the immunity issue, I think the odds are against Trump prevailing. There's going to be a ruling by the D.C. Circuit, which is motivated to make fast work of this. And I think that panel is likely to reject this theory. I'm not too sure the Supreme Court would embrace as broad an immunity claim as Trump is making here. But for Trump, it's the same issue we just talked about. For him, it's how much time you can take off the clock. Because there's a March trial date, which looks really unrealistic at this point for the special counsel. The question is, will the Supreme Court follow regular order and run down this clock more? It's like a fourth quarter play in the NFL. They're trying to leave Smith with as little time as possible to get down the field before the general election.
So Colorado has decided to reverse their decision and allow Donald Trump back on the ballot. Like, we really do live in a cartoon. I really do feel this way. I really feel like we live in a cartoon in this country, right? Now, that handles Colorado. But now the state of Maine has decided to remove Donald Trump from their ballot. Now, Maine's pretty important because remember, Maine does have ranked choice voting. Let's get into this one. We
have breaking news this hour as Maine's top election official has now disqualified Donald Trump from the ballot in that state, an effort that was underway. CNN's Caitlin Polantz has just read this filing and is following this. Caitlin, what is the Secretary of State saying in this decision here?
Caitlin, the Secretary of State of Maine is saying that Donald Trump is not qualified to be on the ballot in the primary in the state of Maine after reviewing petitions from different people who came to her and wanted to remove Trump from the ballot. I'm still looking through it, but one of the findings here from the Secretary of State is that Trump must meet certain qualifications to be able to be on the ballot, and is finding that he is not meeting those qualifications and thus cannot be on the ballot. Now, this is a big decision from the Secretary of State of Maine. Make no mistake about that. It is in line with what Colorado appears to have done here as well, with the Colorado Supreme Court looking at Donald Trump being on the primary ballot there and saying he couldn't be. But the thing about Maine is that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to appeal this. So the Secretary of State is the person here making that decision instead of the court system. But what happens next is that Trump and others all have the opportunity to go to Maine's court system to appeal this. And all of that can play out in a very short amount of time. We could have some sort of resolution in the courts, depending on how fast the courts move and how fast everyone goes to the court. It could be a decision where we're hearing the Maine's court system also coming in and interpreting the state law within a month or so, basically by the end of January.
Let me step in here for just a second and make something very clear. So just like Colorado, Maine is also a state that Donald Trump did not win. So it's like, you know, but they do have ranked choice voting, though. Maine does have that, but Donald Trump did not win that state. So a lot of people are coming forth and they're saying, like, why is it the states that Donald Trump did not even win? Why are they doing this, knowing that Donald Trump most likely isn't going to win that state anyway? I believe because the idea is that it will spread. Remember what I told you before about ballot initiatives? And I said there's 24 states in the US that are ballot initiative states. And everyone tells me, but my state is not a ballot initiative state. But the idea is that once one of those states that is a BI state were to pass legislation, such as legalizing marijuana, for example, like we did in Massachusetts, it puts pressure on the surrounding states that are around it for them to do the same thing. And that's exactly what happened here. We passed legalization of marijuana here in Massachusetts. That put pressure on Connecticut, New York, New Hampshire, although it failed in New Hampshire by 1 vote, which was really weird, Vermont, et cetera. It puts pressure on those surrounding states. So the idea, I think, is that these states like Maine and Colorado, they'll make their voices heard, and then it will put pressure on the surrounding states to do the same thing. And before you know it, they'll have like a number, so many states in the US that have removed Donald Trump from the ballot to make it almost impossible for him to win in the first place. Now, the thing is this: if you're going to beat him at the ballot box. Doing these types of moves that the states are doing right now, it actually just makes Donald Trump look like a martyr. And I said this before when they brought up all these charges against Donald Trump. Again, you ain't got to like Donald Trump, but we need to put partisan politics aside for just for example, and see what's actually happening here. What they're actually doing is they're trying to make it impossible for Donald Trump to even have a chance to win. And they know that he's beating Joe Biden in the polls. So they know that he has a good chance to actually win. And you don't have to be a Trump supporter to see it for what it really is. Let's flip it and pretend it was a Democrat candidate that they were doing this to. Also, in reference to the call of the insurrection, and we're going to go through the definition of what insurrection actually means, you also have to remind yourself that Donald Trump has not been found guilty of that charge. That's why I have that question in the poll. So I see a lot of people, and I saw it on Facebook earlier today, a lot of people cheering this on because they don't like Donald Trump. It just reminds me of when people were cheering on Donald Trump and Alex Jones for being, censored, being removed from platforms, until it started to happen to people on the left. So don't get too excited and start clapping, because for some of you that you still want to support the Democratic Party, I'm here to let you know, don't forget, Marianne Williamson, Dean Phillips, and Cenk Uygur have also been removed from ballots in 4 states in this country. This isn't just happening to the Republican Party. It's happening to anyone that they don't want, by they, I mean the establishment, the donor class, that they don't want to have a chance. Let's continue.
And so, Caitlin Pullins, just because this is breaking news, we truly have just gotten this in. I just want to be clear. The Secretary of State here is pausing her decision pending potential action from the Supreme Court.
I have not gotten to that point in reading this conclusion yet. I would have to look at that a little bit more closely. Things get very complicated when it comes to pausing rulings. But one of the things with this that we should be very clear about here is that the courts are almost certainly going to be weighing in, both state courts in Maine, because there's all kinds of things in the law for Maine to allow Trump or others to appeal this decision from the Secretary of State. That state court can look at it. And of course, Caitlin, the Supreme Court of the United States is already looking at that petition from Colorado's Republican Party saying, please weigh in, because every state has a different process and is making different decisions about Donald Trump being on primary ballots in 2024.
I mean, Caitlin, this is fascinating given what happened in Colorado just last week when the Supreme Court there decided to remove Donald Trump from the primary ballot in a 4-3 decision. That was unprecedented. We had never seen that happen in our nation's history. Now it has happened for a second time in the state of Maine, following the decision by the Michigan Supreme Court to say, we're not getting involved in this. He can stay on the ballot. I think what's important here is a little bit of background, because for those who haven't been following this closely, there are 3 complaints here, and 2 of them were based on the same section of the Constitution that decision in Colorado was, which is, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, basically finding, that Trump, as they did in Colorado, he could not hold office again because of his actions on January 6th. Given the difference here and how this went not through the courts, but to the Secretary of State, what could that mean for the future of the decision that has just been made by the Secretary of State in Maine?
Yeah, well, who is making this decision is always going to be a question, especially if the U.S. Supreme Court looks at this. So in the situation in Colorado, it was the Supreme Court of Colorado, the highest court in that state, looking at basically holding a trial to determine Trump was an insurrectionist in their view, and also determining they had the ability to take him off the primary ballot under the state's law. Now, in all of the other states, including in Maine, there is always going to be a question before the Supreme Court. Can these people even do this? Can a Secretary of State make this sort of decision in party primaries related to who voters can cast their ballots for? And so
apparently so. Apparently they can. This is crazy. Apparently they can make that decision. I mean, it was just a couple of days ago where Marianne was saying that the Secretary of State of Massachusetts actually needs to be vocal, and they can actually make the decision to decide to allow them to be on the ballot because they've been removed from the ballot in Massachusetts as well. Apparently, the Secretary of State can make that decision.
Whenever this goes to the Supreme Court, it's very unlikely at the very beginning, right now, where we're still in this primary process, this first emergency application is before the U.S. Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court, the 9 justices in Washington, D.C., that they're going to be making a call on whether Trump is an insurrectionist or not. They're very likely going to be looking first at the sort of thing that the Colorado GOP wants them to look at, saying, you can't remove the ability for voters to vote for certain people. And that's just the big question that is before the Supreme Court as far as the papers we have right now.
But then what does that say about the Democratic Party, though? Because the DNC has been doing this. The DNC has been removing candidates from the ballot. Marianne, Dean, and Cenk Uygur have been removed from Florida, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and North Carolina. And I'm a registered independent. I don't support Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But I don't understand why Caitlin Collins is pretending to be surprised here or whatever, because this has been known to happen. Look at what is happening in the very party that your network covers for. It's happening across the board. And I'm actually surprised when we get into RFK Jill Stein and Cornel West's review for the end of 2023, when we get into that story tonight, I'm actually surprised because with all this focus around getting Donald Trump off the ballot and getting Biden's Democrat challengers off the ballot, it seems like the third party and independent candidates seem to be getting on the ballot a lot easier than people thought they would. We're going to get into that story. So it's almost like the focus has been taken off of them.
Caitlin Pullen, stand by because I know you're reading through this decision. Come back with us with more. We also have Norm Eisen and Michael Moore here with us. Norm, what's your reaction to this decision by the Maine Secretary of State saying that Donald Trump cannot be on the ballot there?
Well, Caitlin, it's a part of a pattern now, and it's not just that the Colorado courts came to this decision. Remember, the January 6th committee looked at these same issues and also determined that Donald Trump had engaged in insurrection. So I think it validates the concerns of those who believe that the former president is not qualified. As we've talked about, every state addresses this question of how they will or will not apply the 14th Amendment differently under their state laws. Here in this decision that we're still reading from Maine Secretary of State Shana Bellows, what she says is that Donald Trump's petition to be on the ballot, where he says he's qualified, is not accurate because he's not qualified under the 14th Amendment. Very momentous.
All right, folks. Let's go ahead and look at this definition and then I want to get into what Vivek Ramaswamy is now saying. Let's look at the definition of insurrection in reference to our politics here. This is from Britannica. Insurrection. What happened to what happened here? Did you guys seriously just this was just here a minute ago. Let me refresh it. Very weird. All of a sudden, the definition has disappeared. Why are you doing this to me? I'm sorry, guys. Some of you are probably like, Sabby is all over the place tonight. Why is it not? I don't understand the site. It showed. Oh, here we go. All right. It's all the way down here. All right. According to Britannica, insurrection, an organized and usually violent act of revolt or rebellion against an established government or governing authority of a nation, state, or other political entity by a group of citizens or subjects. Also, any act of engaging in such a revolt. An insurrection may facilitate or bring about a revolution, which is a radical change in the form of government or political system of a state, and it may be initiated or provoked by an act of sedition, which is an incitement to revolt or rebellion. So, usually a violent act. And this is the piece I think a lot of people keep pointing back to. Was he guilty of that? So there's that. There's that, right? Something to think about. The violent part. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy has spoken out once again now that Maine has decided to ban Donald Trump from the ballot. And he's standing firm on what he said before, that himself and other candidates that are running through the Republican Party, they should all step down as well in solidarity with Donald Trump. And I think, honestly, that's, again, it's a PR move, but it's actually a smart move as well, because if all of the remaining GOP candidates say, you know what, we're going to remove ourselves from the ballot in those states as well, then you could really bring about some type of change, because obviously they're not going to allow it to where every single candidate is not on the ballot in these states. Let's hear what Vivek had to say.
Secretary of State has kicked former President Donald Trump off the primary ballot. Democrat Sheena Bellows, pictured here with Joe Biden, look at her there, with President Joe Biden, is following Colorado's suit disqualifying Trump based on the insurrection clause. And guess what? She's a Democrat. Much like Colorado, Bellows' decision will likely be challenged in court. Speaking of which, in a stunning turn of events, Trump is back on the primary ballot in the state of Colorado. Secretary of State Jenna Griswold announcing this afternoon that she will certify primary ballots with Trump's name on them, unless the U.S. Supreme Court steps in. Vivek Ramaswamy is a 2024 presidential candidate. Here he is. Vivek, the secretaries of states in 2020, secretaries of states, one individual would come in and wipe away the laws of the legislature and say, because of COVID, I'm changing mail-in balloting. One person changing election rules. That was 2020. 2024, one person saying, I am disenfranchising Trump voters. Your thoughts?
Well, look, Kayleigh, I think you phrased it well, but I would say that this is not an action of one person. This is the action of an entire system that has an anaphylactic reaction to one man. And I think they're dropping the breadcrumbs. They're making it clearer by the day. I'm concerned that they will not allow this man to get anywhere near the start line of the election, let alone the finish line. And I say this as somebody who's running in the same race as Donald Trump. This is not how we should want to win. So I stand by the pledge I made earlier on the back of the Colorado decision, and I reiterate it today, that I will voluntarily, as a Republican candidate, remove myself from any GOP primary ballot where one of my competitors, Donald Trump included, is forcibly removed through this unconstitutional maneuver. And I think one thing that the other Republican candidates can do, Kayleigh, is to fight against this, to say that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie do the same thing, that if Maine is going to do this, we then take Maine out of the GOP primary process. That's the logical way to handle this. And so I made that announcement tonight. I challenge every one of my other competitors in the GOP primary to do the same thing, to say that we will not stand by idly and watch this brazen form of election interference in the GOP primary itself. And I think that that's not a left-wing or a right-wing issue. It shouldn't be. This is about the Constitution and who we are as Americans. And that's why I've taken the position I have.
Yeah, so one thing I want to add here too, to that point, we pretty much know that Maine is most likely going to go to the Democratic Party anyway. So what harm would that do if all of the other GOP candidates decided to remove themselves from the ballot in Maine? Actually, I think that would prove a point, right? That's showing some type of solidarity. But again, I think that, Vivek Ramaswamy at this point in time, he knows, according to his poll numbers, that he's obviously not going to win the GOP nomination. So what is he doing? He's putting his second best foot forward, right? Let me see how I can work this and make it so that if Donald Trump does win the nomination and does win the general, then maybe he would consider me for vice president, or at least to be a member of the cabinet. It's chess, not checkers. That's actually very smart. But I think the bigger issue here is the fact that the number of times you have heard, particularly the Democratic Party, say that we have a democracy and we have to protect that democracy. What you see happening right now to Donald Trump, what you see happening right now to the other Democrat challengers that are challenging Joe Biden by removing these candidates off of the ballot, that just shows you once again that we don't have a true democracy. If you want to beat Donald Trump, the best way to do that is at the ballot box. But all of this interference that is coming into play is trying to make it impossible for voters to even make that decision. And I think that's a really big mistake. I want to be very clear here. I do not support Donald Trump. I do not endorse Donald Trump, but I think it is incredibly huge mistake what they are doing right now. I think this would backfire on them. This is not going to make the American people trust democracy. This is not going to make the American people trust the voting system that we have in this country. And once again, it just shows you that this country, again, is ran by the billionaire class, and they're the ones that are making all the decisions. I'm pretty sure that decision that was made in Maine and Colorado had some money behind it. Pretty sure it had some money behind it.
Yeah, it's a bold position. It's a principled position. And I want to get your take on this. So President Trump, he reacted to the news that you were going to stop spending money on TV ads. He said this on Truth Social. He will, I am sure, endorse me, but Vivek is a good man and is not done yet. Is that something, I mean, I understand you don't have plan Bs. You said that. Is that something you would consider at the right moment, should it come to that? So not a plan B guy.
Well, I actually have been clear,
What about
Kayleigh.
vice president?
I've been clear. Look, if Trump is the nominee, he has my full support and backing all the way, just as I expect his if I'm the nominee. I actually think we're going to deliver a major surprise in Iowa. I'm talking to you from the back of the campaign bus between two stops in rural Iowa. I think we're going to have a major surprise on January 15th because many of the supporters backing me, they're not polled. Many of them aren't even traditional caucus goers, many of them young, some of them past libertarians, other America First conservatives who haven't been traditional Republicans. So I think you're going to see a shock on January 15th. I think we're going to shock the world. I think the polls are dead wrong. But either way, I do think it needs to be an America First candidate leading our movement forward. And I think I'm best able to reach that next generation, Kayleigh, as a young person. That's why I'm going to see this all the way through, and I think we're going to win.
Hey,
Well, Vivek, in order to do that, you're going to have to make sure you're not supporting funding for Israel either. I'm going to add that in there. Let's go ahead and see that poll. Speaking of polls, there was a poll pinned to the top of the live chat. How did you guys respond in reference to this issue with Donald Trump? I'm curious to see these answers here. The poll question is, I know we can get some more votes. We got 650 votes. We have way more people watching. Maybe we can get some more votes here, but it says, do you agree with states removing Trump from the ballot? Yes, if he's found guilty. This is guilty of the insurrection. 19% of you said yes if he's found guilty. 6% said yes regardless of guilt. 57% of you said no regardless of guilt. And I gotta love these folks here. 18% said I really don't care. So interesting. The majority of you said no regardless of guilt, which means that you think that this decision should come down to the ballot box. It's going to be an interesting time, you guys. It's going to be an interesting time. Let me go to some of the comments here in the chat. Thank you for the super sticker, Nelson. Jay Tolbert says, damn, they really don't want this to be president. This is very dangerous. Thank you for the super chat, Polis. Didn't the Colorado Supreme Court found him guilty? I don't think they found him guilty. They said that, well, they said that he was guilty of, inciting the insurrection. And that's in their opinion, but he has actually not been found guilty of that charge yet. Thank you for the super chat, Blarg. Oh my God, it's a mirage. I'm telling y'all, it's sabotage. Beastie Boys, my Sabby hype music. Love your show. I love that song from the Beastie Boys. I love it. I can't stand it. I know you planned it. Thanks for the super chat, Cool Blue. The court ruling in my state, Bellwether, Michigan. Oh, you like the court ruling? Okay, yeah, Michigan said they're not going to do that. Thanks for the super chat. Nobody voting Nikki Haley. Who made this account? Nobody voting Nikki Haley. Political theater. Thank you, Ricky B. Roaming. This is all making a mockery of our so-called democracy. Hashtag Trump 2024. Interesting. Thank you, Polis. The indictments have evidence of his criminality, though, right? But he has not been convicted. That's the thing. They say they have evidence, but he has not been convicted. Thank you for the super chat. Nobody voting Nikki Haley. January 6th was we're just going to leave that there because I know how YouTube can be. Lloyd says, I'm no expert in American politics, but unless the person is convicted of a crime, people should be allowed to vote for them if they want. Otherwise, it feels like the ops are rigging the system. I hear you there. Shout out to Hardlands Media. Huge thank you for Sabby Sabs. Your words of support have meant the world. Yes, guys, please make sure you go over and follow Hardlands Media's channel as well. I know they're going through a huge debacle with YouTube. So, and follow them on Twitter so you can stay up to beat with that issue there. Thank you for the super chat, Flower Bro. YouTube won't let me mention PSL and super chat. See pre-comment. Okay, I don't know what pre-comment is, but thank you. Thank you for the super chat, Cool Blue. Maine can be won by Republicans if they carry its second congressional district better than Democrats in its first. This is how U.S. Senator Susan Collins was reelected in 2020. That's a good point. JB says, remember that Eugene Debs was in prison when he ran for president. Right. And thank you, Lorez. IIRC Maine is one of the two states, Nebraska, that do electoral college votes by popular vote. So it matters if Trump is on the ballot. He could still get electoral votes for Maine. Interesting. Interesting.